and whatever. I played with this kid. You never knew that he was from Boston and was Willis Bennett, Spider Bennett. And Spider Bennett took me out on the playground. I was still in high school a little bit, and we were going back and forth and whatever. And he said, you know, he was calling me double day. He said, double day. He said, before I leave the court, I'm going to dunk on you. I said, there's no way. Well, I'm playing one-on-one with somebody who's going to dunk on. Well, you did. You know, and so that changed my whole opinion about Boston basketball. So I mentioned his name when I got up here and whatever. People recognized who he was, and you know, and it would just surprise me. I kept running into one person after the other that really knew how to play the game. But it was just one of those things that, you know, like I said, the legends in New York kind of like live forever. Yeah. The legends in Boston didn't seem to grow as fast or as long or stay around as long.
Yeah, for those of you unaware, Spider Bennett and Jimmy Walker both played at Laurinburg Prep with a player named Charlie Scott, who is credited with popularizing the crossover, but actually, that might not be the truth. He might have learned it from two guys from Boston. That's a story we want to tell later.
So I'm originally from the south side of Chicago, and I take homage with that New York is the Mecca of basketball, but that's a different story for another day.
Because the right West exists.
You know, however, you know, very similar, you know, to Coach Logan. You know, when I got here in Boston, coming from Chicago, like my high school schedule, I didn't know it at the time, but twice a week I played against an NBA player. Yeah. Whether it was Ricky Green, a young Mark Aguirre, Eddie Johnson, Maurice Cheeks, who we were actually the same class, who played the same way in high school that he did for 15 years in the pros. It's very basic, good defender. You leave him open, he's going to knock down the shot. You know, very, very high basketball IQ. I get on the Boston scene, and I see a whole bunch of good players. You know, I think the difference between the Mecca like New York and a city like Chicago is just the numbers. But as far, you know, Boston being a smaller market, you know, the basketball ability was just as good as any basketball ability throughout the country. And that was what we capitalized, you know, the years that we coached the shootout. You know, we typically had the best team every year because we didn't have 1,000 kids to choose from. But those 75, you know, we got the best 12.
All right. So the thing about the Boston shootout, it ran from 1972 as we know it to 1999, before the whole AAU game completely swallowed it up. Now, what were the years that you were involved as a coach?
I coached, you know, something that hard me, but I coached the shootout for 8 years.
Okay.
And I'll tell you how I got involved in it. I said, you know, when I was in college, I used to be a spectator, a fan of the game, and I would go to the shootout like everyone else, and exciting to see the players from Chicago, New York, and New Orleans, and all that. Well, anyway, you know, I started my coaching career really at the Burke High School, and I was successful at the Burke. I won several, you know, sectionals and all that.
All-time great team.
Yeah. So people approached me, and they approached me, and they said, "Hey, you know, I want to be an assistant at Boston Shooter." I said, "Nah." I didn't want to do it. I really wanted to like work my way out of it, and so I'm going to ask them for something that I know they're not going to go along with. So I said, you know, I'd only get involved if I was head coach. so they took it back to the committee or whatever, and they came to me and they said, okay. And that shocked me. I said, wait a minute, okay. You know, so now I'm going to take on this responsibility of coaching the Boston shootout team. And it was a learning curve for me because it was just on another level. You know, when guys usually got involved with something like that, it was like a high school game, but it's really not a high school game. It's a Division I game. And if you asked any of the coaches around the city at the time if they had any qualified Division I potential players and whatever, everybody thought they had one, but they were hard to find. So you had to scour the whole state in order to find Division I players. I had to confer with people like assistant coaches at BC, BU, you know, all through the state and whatever, said, you know, can I see your list? Who do you have on your list for Division I potential players? And they would, you know, give me the list and whatever, and they say, look, Abner, you know, there's only 4 guys and whatever that's being recruited on that level. There's only 3 guys recruited on that level. And for like, say, the first year or so, we kind of felt it. You know, it just wasn't It wasn't the same. So guys would come in like from Chicago and New York and have all these guys that were highly recruited athletes and basketball players, and you know, Boston just didn't stack up that way. So I had to go the prep school route, I had to go the public school route, I had to go all through the state. And I'll tell you this, you know, I mean, there were some players that I didn't get, but for the most part, after being successful for a couple of years, it was easier to get those players.
So when we look at the stretch of years that you coached, that you both were coaching at the Boston Shootout, what are some of the players that changed everything as far as everyone's perception of Boston basketball from the outside? Because the thing is that people used to joke that the Boston Shootout was like a trap. Everybody underestimated the legend or the level of basketball players that were in Boston, and you brought the best from everywhere, and then they would face a Boston team and be confused on the court. They were down by 10.
Well, you know something, you know, most people that got involved with it thought there was a lot of politics involved. I had players that were, that tried out prior to me coaching, and they would come back and say, you know, the whole process is not that fair. They're not going to keep city players. And, you know, they went on and on about certain things. And I know I sent a couple guys to try out that actually should have made the team or whatever. And, you know, you look at it and you try and be as objective as possible and whatever, you know. So I looked at it and I said, you know, let me go through it and see exactly what they're doing once I started doing that. And I found out that, you know, I mean, you can't look at color, you can't look at the school, you can't look at the league, you can't, you know, because honestly, to get 10 guys on the team, because it wasn't a 12-man, it was a 12-man roster with two kind of alternates and whatever. You know, it's very difficult because you have to find the 10 guys to actually match up and defend and score and all that. So, I mean, I'm trying to win. Yeah. And that's all I know how to do is trying to process a win in my head and how to go about doing it. And Malcolm tells a story about, like, we're sitting on the bench, and this is after, you know, we're involved in the game, early on in the game, and we had two kids on the team, the Babel twins.
Yeah, Mike and John Babel.
Yeah. And we're sitting there, and we hear in the background, you hear this guy say, oh, well, you know, they got to keep a couple of white players on the team or whatever, you know, because, you know, it's not going to look right if they don't. And I looked at Malcolm looked at me, and he said, they just don't get it. They just don't get it and whatever. You know, these kids could play. So I forgot what team we were playing. Guy comes in and John erases a shot.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, same guys were talking in the back. I said, oh, wait a minute. They could really play. I said, yeah, they could really play. I didn't choose any favorites. Some guys still don't talk to me today because I didn't keep the player they wanted me to keep. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, we're trying to win.
You know, it's very funny because I got involved with the shootout the same reason he got involved with it. The year before, we had a guy at Brookline who I thought was one of the best players in the state, and he didn't make it. But they ended up keeping this guy, Rick Brunson, instead, you know. So I was a little pissed off, you know, about it. But, you know, Rick Brunson turns out to be all right. But to your point about how these high-powered teams from around the country will come in here, and the next thing you know, they're down 10 to a Boston team. It was our tryout process.
Yeah.
The tryout process was such that when we got down to that 10 and those 12, them guys knew what we wanted. They knew they were very comfortable with each other, and there was a camaraderie, and then there was a bunch of pride. And even though the team was comprised from players from the greater Boston area and other parts of the state, you know, there's times that we had a kid from Western Mass or something like that, or from Worcester Academy, Mike Marison, who ended up, you know, being a stellar player at the University of Maryland. No one knew him. You know, at all, white kid, you know, too. Very surprising. Again, they started
7-foot white guy, Mike Marison, she came out of nowhere.
Yeah, you know, but he had that all-American look. He wasn't rugged. He wasn't on that Slam magazine, not Slam at the time, but I think it was Sporting News.
Yeah.
He was kind of overlooked. But once those guys went through the rigors of the tryout process, there was a camaraderie that was there. you know, like in place. And then the rest was just Boston pride, you know, because it's nice being the underdog. You know, and the teams, like, I know we won 3 or 4 championships, I can't remember, but the championships that we lost the NBA guys. You know, the 2 twins, the Collison twins, Toby Bailey, Miles Simon. He ended up winning the NCAA championship after throwing a dagger. We're up 2, they missed. Toby Bailey gets a rebound. We back away like, lay it up. So he can just take the 2. Take the 2. We're up 3. Take the 2. He has enough presence of mind to throw it out in the corner. And Miles Simon hit the 3-pointer with no time remaining. We go into overtime, and you know, and we lose that game. But again, you know, our guys brought the best out of all the other players around the country. And even another year, and I think this was the same team, all of the Wayne Turners, the Scooney Penns, and the Randall Jacksons were all in North Carolina for a big tournament. That team was comprised of Zach McCall, the big kid from Newton South, you know,
Paul.
Paul. We took the best available players and competed, and that's the thing that I think Boston doesn't get enough credit for. I tell the story, and I don't know Patrick Ewing, you know, well enough, but I know the Patrick Ewing story because I coached at Brookline, and Brookline and Cambridge was like rivals. I don't know why, because Brookline never won. But you know, and until later on, you know. But however, if Pat Ewing goes to Chicago, you never hear about it. Because in Chicago, you know, players were like, when they came out on the court, they were polished and ready to go. No one took the time to develop players, you know, but because he went to Cambridge and he was fortunate enough to get a coach like Mike Jarvis, Mike Jarvis taught him the game, you know, Mike Jarvis hand-delivered him to John Thomas, you know, the rest is, you know, you're talking an NBA Hall of Famer. Yeah. Same thing like with Coach Logan. You know, Coach Logan comes to the city of Boston from his experience, you know, growing up in Connecticut, being around basketball players, you know, with unbelievable ability, and knowing that it's about being able to compete against those basketball players, and teaching his Boston City guys how to compete. One of the best players I ever seen in the city was one of his guys, Hector Negro. This kid, little Spanish kid, about 5'8", jumped out the gym. We're playing a team from Chicago who was loaded, you know, with one future NBA star, Antoine Walker. To this day, Antoine Walker always asks about, man, what happened to that little kid with the ponytail? You know, because we beat their butt. And I took a lot of pride in that, being from Chicago, beating the Chicago team. So
it's crazy. Antoine Walker played, what, 3 or 4 years in the Boston
Shootout? 3 years in the Shootout, You know, Chris Collins came up on the same team.
On the same team with him,
Whatever. They were loaded. Another Duke player was on that team. It was another guard. That was a Duke player. I forgot his name, but he came up.
And we beat the Marcus Camby, the Connecticut team.
Yeah.
You know, I think we beat them first or second. So to get to the championship, I mean, it's been an unbelievable experience. You know, and I think that, you know, when you talk about basketball, it's really finding those guys, you know, that can compete. Because at the end of the day, everybody has ability, and you can't measure what's inside. You know, I think it's the heart, and I think that's what Boston personifies. You know, it's that, you know, I know they say Brockton is the city of champions, but I think when you're from Boston, you know, you have that swag, like, hey, I gotta represent.
Yeah. So when we look at the players that were available for the Boston Shootout, we're looking at players from maybe the Catholic League. We're looking at kids maybe who are out in the dual county league. We're looking at Boston North and South, but we're looking at a certain type of player, more so than the player that gets all the publicity. But okay, in order to get players, you also have to deal with the AAU circuit at the time. So the BABC is active starting in like 1977. You have the Middlesex Magic, and you have all these other smaller, greater Boston teams. So what was it like trying to get players from all of these different areas and all these different places with their different politics in place?
Well, you know, the politics played a big part of what happens in all the cities, New York, Chicago, and I can give you New York story. Johnny Mathis, the coach of the New York team, came up one year, and basically he had to leave a player behind. And we asked him what it was, and he said it was because of the fact that this player played for a program, but he was getting paid, and basically he was getting paid and to help his parents out. So his mother had to pay the rent, his mother had to buy the food, and he had to play basketball. And he was getting like a couple of $100, $500 under the table to play for a weekend. He couldn't give that up. And, that's understood. That's understood. And it happens in a lot of places. And in Boston, we were fortunate enough to have one class, that was BABC. And Leo did a thorough job of finding all the best players in the area. And if he found someone and they had a game schedule or whatever, their allegiance was to BABC. Although we only played, it was a 3-day tournament, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I remember calling somebody's house and I heard the grandmother in the background yelling at a particular player or whatever that actually played. He said, "No, you're not going with that man. You're going to play in the shootout," because the shootout meant a lot to the people in that whole neighborhood. So, she said, look, Coach, you heard my grandma, I'm coming. And so it was the power of the game after a period of time, after like 4 or 5 years of being the shootout, that it became an important factor in the neighborhoods. And so everybody really wanted to play. And so the politics of the game and whatever clash sometimes. Sometimes I lost a player, like Malcolm just mentioned, the tournament down in North Carolina that pulled a lot of players away. There's some players that didn't play 3 years or 4 years where they were eligible to play and whatever and just didn't play because of that. But we got the best available players at that time and whatever. And I'll say this, right? It was a measurement of what we had to go through, because a lot of times the evaluation came in our first meeting of the other teams. And you would see the other players and whatever look around and say, I only see that player in the circuit, like talking about Rick Brunson, right? They looked up and down our team, they got one guy that could play. I know I had more than one guy that could play, but that was the assessment. And so he knew what the competition was going to be like. They knew what they had to compete against.
And also from that, speaking about that particular year, we developed legends. Anthony Taylor. Anthony Taylor could score the basketball, but he never had played on that level, against that level of competition. And even to the point where he carried us one year to the championship when we didn't win it. But the very next year when we were loaded, we had Scooney Penn and Wayne Turner and Randall Jackson. We started the fourth quarter, and I'll never forget it. Anthony Taylor went on a 12-0 run, by himself, against that New Orleans team. And it was like, match served. So things like that, so it's about opportunity. Again, it was a great opportunity for me, but because of the Boston shootout, and being kind of known around town, I ended up getting a head coaching job at Roxbury Community College.
There was some excellent teams at RCC.
Yeah, national championship.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so everything evolved, right from that.
So, as someone who grew up, I was born in 1975. So I was hearing stories about what was happening in Boston in the 60s and being an eyewitness to things that were happening in the late 70s all the way through the 80s into the 90s when I was in high school. Are there any teams, and I know it's another issue too, with the post-busting era, what happened was a lot of schools ended up becoming defunct, and a lot of schools ended up absorbing each other. So that forever changed the way that players ended up at different schools. A lot of them in the Metco system, a lot of players ended up going outside the city. So that being said, did that ever have a hindrance on what happened in the Boston City League as far as competition?
Like Boston City League, if you develop a player and the player was either a freshman or a sophomore, it's almost assured that you wouldn't keep that player. because you're right, the Medco teams would actually try and recruit your players and whatever, and then you would find the private schools and then the parochial schools and everybody else because they offered a better education, better opportunity to get seen or get a scholarship or whatever. And I don't know why, Boston still has that stigma about it because the teams colleges don't come in and recruit Boston players.
Yeah.
And so some of them are qualified, and I don't know, they just don't do it and whatever, So that's what we had to fight against all the time and whatever. Matter of fact, I played in a sectional championship and lost to Sharon one year and whatever, and after the game, the guys all shaking hands and, they dap one kid up and whatever. And I said, I asked one of my players, well, how do you know him? Slowly. It was right down the four corners. We play with them all the time. I'm like, but the thing about it, the promise of serving the kid a lot better than the Boston Public Schools is only a promise.
Yeah.
But it was a promise that didn't actually come to fruition at all because I see the kid riding around on a bicycle after he graduates and whatever. So what happened to his opportunity? Why do you go to Sharon High? Why do you go to there or any other place like that if it's not going to benefit you after high school? So sometimes they take advantage of the kids and kid doesn't take advantage of the opportunity. I don't know how it works and whatever, but it just doesn't work out well sometimes.
Yeah, that's the dark side of basketball is that, and especially, kids of color, they never really learn the basketball business.
Yeah.
And I think, the basketball business is thriving and we don't thrive.
No.
The players, the participant, whether it was Antoine Walker who made millions of dollars but didn't have, the know-how to invest properly and to manage his money, again, we all end back up on that bicycle,
Yeah.
riding around town. And that's what we have to do a better job of. And, way before the prep privates, I know so many kids that lived in Boston that went over across the bridge and played for Cambridge because there was in sports. But we have to do a better job of educating, our kids of having a broader picture than just being a player.
All right, so we've discussed some of the issues regarding coaching and the things that happen with players. Now, there are a lot of players that a lot of people still don't know well, even though, we may have talked about them at the barbershop or wherever, but are there any players that you feel should have been more well regarded than they are, that you remember from the years?
During my coaching years, it's probably a bunch of them that I had. Like I said, I had a kid, Tyrone Jackson, that should have played and whatever on the next level and whatever, and didn't play on the next level. I had Hector Negron and whatever. Hector was probably one of the best guards out of Boston ever, and whatever, and just never got the opportunity to play on the Division I level. If I think about it long enough, there's a bunch of kids. Kevin Devenish and whatever. I had Kevin that went down to Texas and played down in Texas, but basically his name when he left Boston wasn't as big as it should have been. I could tell you a story about my son, who wasn't a basketball player, but was a football player, and played football here in Massachusetts, and was probably either the second best or the third best football player at the time. He goes down to the University of Maryland after the fact and whatever, and the coach asks him, well, how many offers did you get when you were in Massachusetts? And he says, I got eight offers, 8 big-time offers. Syracuse, Boston College, Penn State, this, that, and the other. But his response to that was that you would have had 35 offers if you would have played in Maryland, high school circuit and whatever. It's unbelievable how we could go almost overlooked. I had another player and whatever that someone called me out of the blue. And they said, look, we have an opening at a prep school down in Virginia. Do you know anybody that could actually do a military prep school? I had one kid at the time, Craig Charles. And Craig, I said, Craig, go and take a look at it. And the guy, well, he went down there and actually signed up, did a year, and he called me back and said, Logan, this is the hardest year I've ever done. Having to listen to somebody that's 5'8", and I'm like 6'5", 6'6", giving me orders and all that. So I said, how did it work out? Well, something, he ended up playing football. And I think he had an opportunity to play in the next level, football and whatever. He played in Europe for a while and whatever. But the opportunity would have never come to him if he hadn't gone to the prep school down in Virginia. So there's a lot of players like that, I think, that are overlooked and whatever in different sports. I had, I'm giving you these guys, Tyrone McQueen. Tyrone McQueen was a math genius or whatever. He's at the Burke, he takes the SATs, I think he almost aced the math part of it. So he gets a scholarship to Ohio State. Unfortunately, he had narcolepsy or whatever. And so Tyrone didn't stay there. But Tyrone, that was in the, I guess the early 90s or whatever. He's the last football player to ever get a Division I offer out of the Boston Public School.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm like, how long has that been? So those kind of things happen all the time, and you look at what if, this, maybe the school system, maybe the academic piece. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but, there's a lot of guys that I can mention probably that should have had an opportunity. Maybe not on the Division I level, but should have played on the next level.
Right, so, same question.
Well, I tell you, I want to go with the guys who are legends, and they never really get the recognition. I think about the Mike Bennett's, the Ron Jackson, the Russell Townsend. These guys like that. My personal favorite was a guy. He didn't have a stellar high school year, and he actually went to UMass Boston. But as an adult and just playing in competitive leagues, I never seen anybody as good as Nip Hall. I mean, he shot it from wherever he wanted to. Told you he was going to shoot it from wherever he wanted to, and also would tell you what you can do about it. I'll bank this in. I'm going to shoot this with one hand. So there's guys that, again, for the same reason, not Boston not being a popular market, that just get overlooked. And then I look and I'll stay with Ken Hall for a minute. He had the opportunity to go play with Carl Hobbs at UConn, and he passed it up and he stayed at UMass Boston, out of loyalty. You don't get guys like that now. Man, if I get an opportunity to go, see you. So there's another factor. It's kind of like, there's people that was caught up in the generation values. Those old values, I'm going to work hard to make the best out of the situation that I'm in instead of jumping for the next situation. And some people got punished for having that type, of attitude. And then the flip side is where we are today, is where guys don't stay at any place long enough to establish themselves. And as soon as it gets tough, they cut bait and leave. And they don't want to be coached, they don't want to be disciplined. They want to just have the easy road. And I'm more concerned about the legends that we'll never know about because they'll never be legends.
So when we think about all the different powerhouses that were in the Boston North and South, they competed in the MIAA tournament, went deep, necessarily didn't win because they had to fight the powerhouses from all over the state, right? That funneled a bunch of kids to the local colleges, and we had some local powerhouses, especially in the small New England schools, and that all stems from back in the days when I was growing up. There was a school called Boston State College that actually existed. Now it's part of UMass's system, and now it's like an art school. But I remember that there was a time where in the late 70s, all throughout the early 80s, they were a team that used to compete on the Division III level and used to win championship after championship after championship. And a lot of the reason was because a lot of guys stayed and actually played there because they just liked winning. And we also had RCC, which was winning national championships, and we had a bunch of guys that everybody knew from the city, and they would actually go to RCC just to see them destroy people. So do you have any like stories about those times?
Well, I'll talk about the RCC. I want to say, you know, it started with a couple of guys, and the first two guys for me was Sly Mabry and Ricky Lambright. And my first year at RCC, we went 8-14. This was no Sly Mabry, no Ricky Lambright. And after that, I realized, I said, wow, couldn't nobody got more than 8 wins out of this group of guys that I got. And I had a friend of mine, a street preacher, Reverend Dale Seymour. He brought me Ricky Lambright, and through Ricky, I got Sly. And the very next year, we finished third in the country. And then after that, Frankie Patton, you know, came. You know, Frankie was an All-American, one of the toughest little players, you know, like to ever put on sneakers. Dunstan Dublique, Jose Langham, you know, a former Brookline High guy. He actually played for me freshman year at Brookline High.
That was the Warriors.
Yeah, the JV coach. So, and we began to build it. And then, after a while, we got all of the best players that was under the radar that needed junior college. And that national championship team of 2000, I tell people all the time, I said that was my favorite team. And they said, oh, well, yeah, you won the national championship. No, that's not how it went. They did everything the right way. We practiced for 1 hour and 15 minutes every day. 7 a.m., no one was late. We ended at 8:15 because most of them had classes at 8:30. Those guys taught me, because I grew up in that area, you guys don't have to like each other, you need to respect each other. Those guys taught me to be successful, you have to love each other. Because when you love your brother and he dribbles the ball off his foot, you just get back on defense. And then those guys did things, I mean, in a lot of aspects, and I mean, obviously I'm biased, they were pros. They weren't pros in the sense that they went on and played professionally. They were pros in the way that they went about conducting their business. And a guy told me this, I don't know how true it is today. He said, no one had ever won a national championship where all the participants live within a 15-mile radius of each other before that happened in 2000.
Wow.
And I don't know if anybody has done that since.
That's very Boston.
So, well, you know, okay, let me tell you about one player that comes to mind that actually ended up with Malcolm on one of Malcolm's teams, and that was Ryan Watkins. And you know, they refer to him as the Wizards. And you know, I saw Ryan play in middle school, and I just never saw anybody play like him in middle school before. And at the time, I thought he was an 8th grader going into 9th grade, going to be in high school. And so I just mentioned it to a kid that was in my class and whatever, you know, they like basketball, always talk basketball after class. And I said, I saw this kid play and whatever, you know, and I said, you know, I described him, who he was. I didn't even know his name. And the kid said, that's my cousin. I said, that's your cousin? He said, yeah. I said, so what school is he going to? He's not coming to work. He says, it's Logan. He's in 7th grade. I said, 7th grade? Plays like that? Yeah, so, you know, a couple of years after that, after graduate, I didn't see him around the first couple of days of school or anything like that. And I see a woman walk in the door with this kid I actually saw Ryan. She walks in the door, and I'm standing in the hallway, and she says, Coach, I heard you want this player. I said, yeah. I said, he's going to school here? Yeah. Apparently, it got